You ready?
This is the fun group. I like the afternoon group.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. Awesome. This is our second round. This morning we had great questions, and so I'm going to encourage everybody to ask questions. So welcome. Thank you for coming. Many of you know who our steering committee is for this project, the Parks Library Space Feasibility Project. So Chris King, Kathy Parsons, and I are the library components. Dan Nutini, who's the Assistant University Architect, is also on the steering committee, and Margie Tabor from FP&M, Assistant Director for Space Stuff. Right? That's what Dan said, Margie. Okay. So that's the Iowa State component, and then with us today are two members of our Perkins and Will team that we're working with on this study. We have Jessica Figgenholtz. She's our project manager and an architect with Perkins and Will. And Derek Jones, who's also an architect and serves as a library expert consultant person for Perkins and Will. Two other members of the team have been here a couple of times. Some of you have met them or seen them. Mark Joliker is a principal with Perkins and Will, and then Eileen Jones, who I already forgot her title, but has to do with brand and experience. Some terms you're going to hear in our presentation today. So because we're having, our guests are here today to present to staff. Tomorrow's 9 o'clock session, the weekly session, is no longer on the table. Although if there's a question you don't want to raise today or don't think about till tomorrow, I'll be in my office. Ed is coming by, and I'm sure he'll need some time. But if anybody else wants to come by, you certainly can to talk about the study. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to our guests to walk us through. We'll welcome questions throughout the process and at the end. So just get your hand up and ask away. And thanks for coming.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. I know it's that mid-afternoon slump, so we'll try. You guys came prepared with the chocolates, so I'm going to come tackle your table in a little bit. But we appreciate your time. And as Beth mentioned, we really want this session to be interactive and engaging, so please interrupt. Stand up, wave your hand, and ask questions. If something is not clear or we haven't explained it, please. There are no silly questions. We really want this to be a conversation, and we want it to be as open and transparent as possible, and really have you guys walk away with the understanding of what our team is doing today, or for this project. So some quick items that we're going to be discussing is a feasibility process, a feasibility study process, and what we've done, where we are, and what we'll be hoping to accomplish. A little bit of a summary, some of the visioning sessions that a few of you have been in over the last few months, and then talking about some of the themes that have percolated to the top with the various surveys and interviews and stakeholder meetings that have been conducted. Derek will talk a little bit about existing conditions and about the infrastructure of the building and about trends, some things that we're seeing out there and where we might want to move Parks Library. Process to date. So I know that this is a little bit difficult to read, but with a feasibility study, what it really is a roadmap for the library leadership team. And what we here at Perkins and Will are trying to do is collect a lot of the data and input through visioning sessions, visual listening, which I think some of you participated in, and surveys, and collecting all of this information and synthesizing it into a program about where you are now and where you want to be in the future. This will also include some planning sessions, and as we come up with options and scenarios that will also have a cost model built along with it and a schedule, we'll be able to give these options and scenarios to the library leadership team in a final deliverable, which will wrap up at the end of November. And that's what a feasibility study is. It's really a roadmap for people to be able to make priorities and decisions. And because there's a lot that I think we all want as a wish list for this library, part of that schedule is phasing. And if not everything can be done at the same time, what are some steps that we can do to get us there at the interim, at different intervals? Visioning summary. Last month we were here, and I think many of you participated in work sessions that involved this visual listening, where we had images on a wall, and you had green dots and red dots, and you were able to walk around and highlight what images really resonated well with you and other ones that you were just did not like at all. And we had some very lively conversations. We also had meetings on culture. What is the culture like right now at Parks Library, and where do you see it, and where do you want it to be? And what are things that the library is doing really well right now? And from some of the conversations and surveys we've had, overwhelmingly, people really like the way that the services and the programs that the Parks Library offers. It's welcoming and it's inviting, and a lot of that is attributed to the folks here in this room, the librarians and the staff. These might be a little difficult to read, but these are some of the goals that have been generated from the various conversations occurring over the past couple of months. But I'll highlight a few of them. Improving student spaces for study, research, learning, and collaboration. Making it a place for them to socialize and play, but also giving them those zones and areas where they can go for the quiet heads down work that they need to get done. Creating a single service point for library services, being basically more efficient and streamlined in the services so that it doesn't get lost on the various levels. Creating a technology playground and sandbox, a place that faculty and students and staff can go and experiment with teaching methodologies, curriculum, or just new technologies that would enhance the services and the way that we deliver products. Spaces for new partnerships with other university units. We've talked with tutoring services, we've talked with food service and IT, and there's probably departments and groups out on campus that you aren't even aware of maybe that could be leveraging for future partnerships to make a stronger library. Increasing collection space for special collections and university archives. How can we take a look at what is so precious and valuable in the special collections and make it more public facing so that people will be drawn into the library and kind of get lost and explore the other fantastic things the library has to offer. Staff spaces to be a little bit more improved and efficient in the way that they work and the way that they can collaborate. Increasing classroom space for library instruction and other classes, as well as library resource needs. Making the collection space leaner and opening, that would allow then these other spaces to be able to fill in with that improved student and grad and faculty spaces. And finding spaces for new initiatives such as scholarly communications, data management, and digital repository, as well as library publishing. But I think that one of the biggest things is making visible the connections between collections, service and learning, and scholarship. And really all of the hard work that you all do here and all of the services you provide, how can that be more apparent to folks here on campus and the greater Iowa State community? So when we did that culture exercise last month, you can see that there are some really positive things that I mentioned earlier going on in today's culture. They find that it's in a welcoming environment, and everybody here is really helpful and very knowledgeable. People that are subject matter experts, they know their stuff. And if they don't know, they know where to go get it. But I think there is also, on the other end of the spectrum, that there are some silos. And when there are silos, it makes it hard for people to be productive and engaged in their everyday tasks. So how can we shift this to be a little bit more of that future thinking of where you want to be? More integrated, a little bit more collaborative, having a common vision that everybody can work towards. And when you have that, you become a little bit more simplified in nature. And that also can translate to a simplified library. Yes, please, question.
Stupid question.
No, there is no stupid questions. Silo, great question. Segregated, so when one department is working here and another department is maybe on another floor or even next to them, but they don't talk and they don't share best practices, they aren't really engaged. People just kind of come in, clock out. And that was just a little bit of the feedback that we heard, that the way that you're set up now, there's barriers that don't allow maybe communication to flow as efficiently as possible.
Yeah.
But great question. So I think in the future is taking a look at those silos and those barriers and how can we simplify and really be a little bit more visible and clear about what you do and how it can help the library and move it forward. And I always mention this, make the library cool to be smart again. Make it a place that the students want to come and be a part of. Please feel free to jump in, whatever. So we took all of those culture exercises and visioning exercises and filtered it down to really discovery, engagement, inspiration, and creativity. And where we see is the Parks Library is at the intersection of all of those. And how can we leverage those themes moving forward? So as part of discovery, it's really easy to find your way. You know, the first time that I came here, I was a little, I guess, discombobulated maybe about just how to know where I was going, or even just to find the bathroom. And so how can we repurpose the spaces to be a little bit more streamlined and welcoming and inviting and easy to find the resources and easy to find the materials? Inspiration. When you walk in the entry right now, do you feel inspired? Do you feel that wow moment? And if not, that's really kind of what a library on an academic campus should feel like, and that's kind of what we heard people want it to feel like. So how can we change that perception so that when you do walk in the doors, that you really are impressed that this is a center of knowledge and this is where I really want to be and stay at? Making it a placemaker on the campus. Engagement, interactive and inclusive, and it goes back to, I think, your comment about silos, is that there are some barriers now, so how do we just open that up and make it a little bit more of an open dialogue with students to students, faculty to students, staff to faculty, staff to students, and at all levels. And creativity, interaction, motivation, being bold and confident. And this is where we can also start bringing in technology to help with this, and really being strong and proud of the Parks Library and the missions that we stand for. This is a word cloud that we generate when you input a lot of the words and themes that people have articulated over the past few months. And you can see the ones that are the largest and the most bold have to do with the services, technology, being open 24/7, an event venue, exhibits. So really all the public-facing components are really what people are excited about and really want to see this transition to focus on. And I don't know if it's a little difficult to read, but the experience, this has kind of started to be the mission statement for this feasibility study, and that's been input that we've received. So I'll read it really quickly so you can really understand, I think, the essence of why we're all here and working with the leadership team as well as you today. The new Parks Library will reflect the university's goals for a 21st century library, supporting new ways of learning, researching, collaborating, working, and socializing. This welcoming and dynamic environment will encourage students, faculty, and staff to connect in a variety of venues and space types that create and strengthen library culture. Warm and natural materials, dynamic technology, light-filled spaces, and flexible environments will serve to enhance an energized and meaningful library experience. So visual listening, just to recap, I think for those of you that were there, that was when we had those big boards with images categorized by a lot of different, work environments and social environments, what have you, and you did the red dots and green dots, what you liked and didn't like. And so we're just going to quickly recap those so that everyone has an understanding of what we've heard. Traditional references. This was a really lively conversation that I enjoyed, is that when you think of a library on a higher education campus, this is what you think of, the traditional reading room. And Parks Library has a fantastic reading room, and I think there was concern that would be lost. And there's so much history here and beauty in this building that's something that we want to leverage and we want to celebrate, and that's definitely something that will not go away. But how can we look at it and move it forward into, infuse it with the appropriate technology and infuse it with the appropriate infrastructure so that it can be better utilized? Flexibility. How can we maximize our spaces? So a great example of it is this classroom, is that when it is used as a classroom, it's utilized, but also when it's off the calendar, it's utilized as a reading room or a study room for students. So how can spaces be repurposed to be utilized for multiple functions throughout the day? Whether it's through, partitioned walls or folding walls, various types of furniture, technology, flexibility. There's a variety of ways of looking at that. Integrated spaces. Really taking a look at, how, again, can spaces be tackled from a variety of ways, and having stairs maybe not just be stairs, but using that as a study space or gathering space. Having study furniture within the stacks, again, not making it a row of bookshelves, but infusing it with areas where it can be a quiet heads down zone or small teams, and really kind of livening up that environment. Transparency and translucency. Making it just more open, making it so that there aren't any perceived barriers. Everybody is working together collaboratively at all levels of the staff, and as well as groups, so that people can see what students are working on. If there are engineering students working on a team and maybe an economics student is walking by, maybe they can give input or insight. There's just a lot of different ways that this transparency can be brought in, which will also lead to better daylight infusing throughout the entire floor plate. We talked a little bit about variety of study spaces. One of the themes, and Derek will talk about it in a little bit, is that we do talk about collaboration and small group learning, but students still want to come to the library for a quiet space. And we have to make sure we can accommodate that, because it's not all team-based learning. And so by giving choice, that is what's going to draw people to be here. Because some days, and this is also probably similar to the way you work, there are days where you need to go swirl away and work on pages and pages of documents. And there are days where you might work with 2 or 3 other people in a small group environment. And there are days where it might be a larger setting like this. So being able to offer variety and choice, to be able to learn and to work, is really a successful way to repurpose spaces. Quality of light. Being thoughtful in the way that you bring the light is really important in a library. You have to be cognizant of glare with technology. You have to be cognizant with special collections or pieces that can't stand a high, direct sunlight. So really being thoughtful and respectful of the interior spaces. Welcoming and approachable. I don't, you saw in some of the earlier slides, and as I mentioned, welcoming is a theme that people have said that they feel this library is now and that they want to keep and maintain. And so how can that translate into design and the way that the service points are set up? So if somebody comes in, they know where they're supposed to go and the person that they need to talk to, but are wanting to come in, and it's that experience that makes them come in, but an experience that makes them want to stay. Smart technology. Technology is just rapidly changing, and how can the library accommodate for this? Because by the time it's planned for and installed, it's already out of date, right? And so how can we leverage the infrastructure to have the appropriate technology that is not conflicting with maybe some of the other projects that are going on campus with the Student Innovation Center or the Student Union, but how they complement each other and how they can all leverage their resources together. Brand and storytelling. There's such a rich story here with Parks Library. There's a rich story with all the artwork throughout the building and throughout the campus. And there's a rich story with Iowa State being a land-grant institution and all the technological advancements that have occurred here. So how is that rolled together and really celebrated as part of this project? And when you are here, you know it's an Iowa State building, and really making it a place and a place-making experience. We heard a lot about materials, materiality, and making this a warm environment, not this cold and stark, modern place that nobody feels comfortable in. Because I think a lot of us, for you that here, this is your place of work. This is where you are day to day. But even for students and faculty, sometimes they're here for just an hour or two, and sometimes they do hunker down for a long period of time. So making it warm and inviting. Existing conditions, warm and inviting.
So in parallel to the visioning process and getting to understand what the aspirations are, we were also going through the building, going through the documents, trying to understand what the conditions that you currently live in are. And the first thing we did was we began to map your program into the existing space. And this is our first pass at mapping in broad general areas. And yellow represents your collections. Orange are those study spaces, learning spaces. The light green are some of the partners, and the darker green, your staff spaces. And one of the things that jumped out to us was how distributed and fragmented the staff spaces are. And that goes back a little bit to what we were talking about in terms of siloed or not having a close connection all the time. Certain groups are closely knit, but you can see how you're distributed across all floors and all edges of the building. So this was one revelation that we had. You are in a building that has been added on to incrementally over the years, from the early 20th century to the 1960s, again in the 60s, and again in the 80s. And so it is not a building that was conceived with a single vision, but was added on. You have, on the second level, there are at least 10 staircases in the building. This doesn't help with easy navigation. Did you have a question? No, sorry. And so just trying to understand how that all works. Do you need them all? Are they all essential or not? But it leads to a little bit of confusion and navigational difficulty. We also looked at large-scale issues from your atrium and the smoke evac to very small door pulls and stair rail handles and steps and things like that, and the ever-popular bathroom issue, which we know you have 3 sets of men and women's toilets on almost every floor. And is there a way to simplify that, maybe to make them not only code compliant, accessible, but also easy to find and easy to use? And we believe that this is a quick study we did where we could take a pair of men and women's and make that a single sex and do the same down the hall and probably get you better code compliant and maybe a little bit easier to understand where you need to go to find a restroom. And also introducing what is becoming increasingly important is gender neutral facilities as well. This is a diagram. On the left, it shows a little bit about how maybe the perception, it's not literal, but you have service points that are distributed at different locations on each floor. You have staff that are distributed on different locations on each floor. And you have staff areas or service points. So could we simplify that? Could we co-locate, not all, but the majority of staff into an area? Could we systemize or make more easily discoverable where the service points are, so that when you go to the 3rd floor, you intuitively know where you would find either a self-service point or a support staff? When we first came to this building, this is a diagram of our first impression, and I think I've shared this with some of you, but it feels like there are 4 buildings when you arrive at this building. And those are your original historic early 20th century building that we're standing in now, has some beautifully proportioned rooms, has a different kind of architectural vocabulary. That's one type of experience. We have the tiers, which again is partially part of that original building, but it is its own distinct environment. Some people love it, some people don't like it, but there's no denying that it is, one of a kind here on campus. This area connected is that 1980s edition where you can stand on the 4th floor and look down to the 1st floor. You can stand inside and look out to the quad. It is visually connected, literally physically connected in a very positive way. A lot of people like to work out in that open environment. And then you have the 60s edition. Actually, it was 2 separate editions that form that area that I've labeled generic. And it's a perfectly functional, useful, but it really lacks character. It doesn't really say anything about ISU or the ISU library. Yeah.
For me, there are 2 experiences in the tiers, because we have what we call the old tier and the new tier.
Yeah.
The first part was built in 1921 on the vision of a guy named Angus MacDonald Sneed, or Sneed MacDonald. I don't know if you know him, but, and this goes back to some of the themes that you were talking about light coming in and making everything look transparent. So we have the inviting, luminous place where you had books and books and books out there. So, and then in the new part, which was built 2 years later, there are some of those features that you talked about. I'm sorry, I forgot her name, but Jessica, that she talked about that were built into the stacks. There are some carpeted areas that you'll see where shelves have been built over, and those used to have chairs around them, and graduate students can go and have a smoke while they're in the past, while they're out studying, and that was a place to socialize. And since then, shelves have been built over those, and we don't have that anymore, but the carpet is still there to remind us of that.
And you know, those are in that time, that was the end-all be-all technology of libraries. You know, that was the robotic retrieval system of the early 20th century. And
that was the library of the future.
Yes, exactly. And it actually is, in many libraries, it becomes an obstacle because often they are in the dead middle of the library and you have to get through them to get to the other side. In your case, I think fortunately they are not, that most of the natural circulation goes around or to one side, and therefore they remain a very positive and high-density solution to book storage or collection storage. But in this sort of diagram, we really see a lot of the potential in bridging between those different experiences and maybe rethinking that generic area and saying, what can we do to it in the process of not only making it more useful and efficient, but giving it a stronger connection and identity with Iowa State. Zooming out a little bit further at the whole campus, libraries are traditionally one of the founding buildings on a campus. They're usually at the physical core of the campus. They've always been at the intellectual core of the campus. And I think you can see here in this diagram of ISU that that's indeed where Parks Library is, and I think it wants to stay there. The challenge is you don't have the opportunity to clear the site and go from the ground up. You have to work with the eccentricities of this building and all of its incremental evolution. As we zoomed in a little bit here, this is Parks in red, and we've dashed in the Future Innovation Center. It may be a different shape, but that's generally where it's going. And looking at the immediate surroundings, and you have your natural existing entry from the south. Makes a lot of sense. We've heard a lot of commentary, and now that the campus has built up to the north quite a bit, there's a lot of desire to have a second entry. And it could be the former original entry on the east, but we're also asked ourselves, well, if the population growth is up there along Osborne, is a north entry perhaps applicable, or would it work better? So that's something that we're currently exploring. So going back to a little bit library trends, or specifically academic library trends, we talked to a lot of your students through Intercept interviews, and these are some of the things we heard. And I have to first give a slight disclaimer in that we talked to students at the library. So we were capturing students who were already here and interested. But those students, by and large, more than 50% said they come here 4 days or more per week. That's a very high recidivism to come back and regularly come. So that's great. That's speaking to the positive services that Jessica talked about. On what they preferred or where they wanted to go, the majority actually said, we're looking for quiet spaces in addition to others, but they kept mentioning, I need quiet, heads down, by myself working spaces, 60%. Others, it also included group spaces, technology, access to technology that they either owned but didn't want to lug across campus here, or technology that they simply don't have access to. And interestingly, many spoke about unique spaces, that the library offered spaces that they couldn't find anywhere else on campus, whether it was to squirrel away in a little hidey hole in the tiers, or whether it was to be in a very lively kind of group, more social environment that you have on the third floor. We asked them, what do you like most? What do you want to maintain? And they talked about the variety of spaces. Most people were not committed to one single space. They liked the idea that, well, I can go to work with my friends individually or as a group, or get away from them all and work independently. They talked about quiet, and then there were a number of people generally like the hours. Some people said, well, more hours would be nice, but they always say that. What would they change? Topping the list was more outlets and more power. I have heard many students say, when my battery dies, I leave the library on their computer. So the duration of that stay is closely tied to either their access to power or how robust the battery is in their device. They would like more study rooms. They're looking at more individual spaces. And I think the only other one I would call out here is there was a lot of talk of daylight. And when I come into the library early in the morning during the term, the first seats that fill up are either in the addition on the north end by the windows, or in that what I call the connected space, the 80s edition by the big glass wall. Those get filled up very quickly. So the library, the traditional library that we see on campuses is about 15% staff areas, 35% is dedicated to study, carols, reading rooms, patron spaces, and about 50% is dedicated to collections. That's really a collection-focused model. What we're seeing with the advent of more and more new technology, which is not erasing collections by any means, but it's changing the collection profile, is that there is a shift that is going more and more towards it's basically flipping collections and patron spaces around, where 50% is really dedicated to new types of labs, reading rooms, digital production, access to private group rooms or quiet study, and that's really filling up. And when we map Parks Library, we see that it's kind of somewhere in between those two right now. What I would note here is that your staff area is a bit larger, and the collections area is a bit larger than this profile here, and yet it's still a little bit smaller than the more traditional collection focus. And if you break it down a little bit further, where collections isn't just a monolithic, but we look at the variety and particularly special collections within that, it's a little bit different. And I think what has been articulated in the goals and aspirations of this feasibility study is really to look at ways to grow teaching and learning spaces, to increase the number of seats and the quality of those seats within the library. Also to grow special collections, which is hands down, it is the area of the most physical growth within collections. And that comes in order to do that, we have to start looking at staff space. There are different ways that we can look at it in terms of a more efficient and higher productivity, and also in the general collections. Not to say that you shrink collections, but that you look at them responsibly in how you read them, and only you can judge that, and how we can find ways that they take up less footprint by densifying or finding better strategies to store them and access them. But before we do any of that, we want to harvest as much space as we can. Right now, there is a very, very large space on the 4th floor that's dedicated to mechanical equipment, which is essential, you need it. But we've looked at the possibility of lifting it up to the roof level to build a mechanical penthouse and harvest what could be maybe 7,000 square feet of space back for library functions and use. In terms of collections, we've been working with Kathy and the measurements of the 2015 measurements of collections. And we believe that sticking with those targets, that we can accommodate the collection with about 78 to 80% capacity. So, I mean, they're pretty full. By using the tiers, by putting a high density system onto the lower level, And we can still accommodate quite a bit of quiet study space down there within that storage system. And then selecting maybe some themed collections that could come out that might be the more frequently used or browsable collections that might go up on upper floors within patron spaces. We did look at an automatic retrieval system and put into the tier area, and what we found was it really probably wasn't suitable to this institution's use, because we were looking at an ultra high density system in an already high density storage, so the payoff was not as good as you might have hoped. Sorry, did you?
When you spoke of the high-density system on lower level, would that be accessible to the public? Or would it
Yes,
be-
yes.
So they
It would
could
be.
move,
It would be, you know, the rolling storage system, and we would break it up enough so that one person isn't trying to move 50, you know, flights of books at once. Yeah.
What's the difference between scenario 1 and 2? I can't really tell what I'm missing.
Scenario 1 is probably the most aggressive, high-density filling that space, whereas scenario 2, we've introduced little study zones in there, so we've moved a little bit of the collection so that we could get those quiet study spaces. And really, those two could evolve and stretch back and forth. This is I like to say it's semi-accurate. It's a section cut through the building as if you slice the building in half, but I've distorted the size of some areas just for legibility. But to orient you, this is the east entry here that's not in use as you come in, and that would be the doorway into this room here, for example. And you come up the stairs to the rotunda, and this is the large periodical space. So we would like to preserve that. I mean, that is a very, very special space. You can't recreate those spaces now. But we think that there's an opportunity in the stacked area that currently houses the fireplace reading room, the learning innovation hub, the staff lounge on the 3rd floor, those stack of spaces that are within the historic building, but they're really at the core of the library, and they're very visible. And is that a place where maybe we could repurpose and put programs that you really want to showcase, you really want to let the rest of the campus community know that is offered here at the library? We haven't decided or determined what those are, but could they be spaces that focus on technology, for example? Or could they be spaces that are really about inspiration and inspiring people towards their learning and scholarship? It's a variety, but it's a notion that that's a core element to help express library or Parks Library identity. Over in this side, this is more of the 60s stack area. We believe that keeping special collections on the 4th floor makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of infrastructure and some specialized structure and mechanical systems already serving that area. It probably would be, it would be a little Herculean to try to move that. Could we co-locate a large body of staff on that floor with what is available on the 4th floor with special collections and perhaps on the floor below? We think that's very possible, and that would really open up the lower 3 floors to a variety of active and quiet learning and study spaces. So let's look at those 3rd and 4th floors a little bit more carefully, because before we jump down that road, we wanted to confirm to ourselves, and we have a pretty strong comfort level that all of the staff and special collections will fit on the 3rd and 4th floor. All of the staff that can go there. There are some staff that really have to be near CERC or those types of areas. Can come up to this floor. And by co-locating, there are some efficiencies. You can have more shared amenities, copy, print, your break rooms. And by doing so, we think that not only can we, without really sacrificing the quality of individual spaces, in fact, we believe it will raise the quality of individual spaces. You get better adjacency, better collaboration, better ergonomics, more access to daylight, and that orange dashed line around the perimeter is the thought that right now it's a relatively dark volume. It was designed for books. Books don't like a lot of light, they don't need a lot of light. But if that becomes more of a people space, I think it's important that we find strategies to bring daylight in. So that's what that is trying to articulate. And this was a very first initial study just to discover or prove to ourselves that we think it's possible. Right now, along that service drive, you have a lot of precast panels that have been literally added or attached to the building. It would not be that far-fetched to remove those and replace them with glass and some kind of a screening mechanism that would, so you're not suffering from what can be very harsh western daylight in the afternoon. Yeah.
Can the first floor gonna also benefit from some of that, or is there structural problems?
There's two issues there. One is it's, remember that's where, oh no, that isn't. Sorry, I was thinking lower level. I think there's architectural issues, that's the one thing. Not to say that we couldn't look at it, but it gets into more than a removal of a panel and putting it in, I think.
If someone who works in one of those areas is pretty dark back there, that's why I was asking.
Yeah. Something we can look at. Going back to that north addition, we have been studying that as a possibility, and also the ability that north or no north addition, we believe that by reconfiguring or rethinking the stair that goes up the center of the atrium, which is a very, has a strong identity, it has a strong sculptural quality that really connects the floors, so not to lose it, but maybe to strategize how we can use it and ultimately find a way that it can be closed off on the ground level periodically so that you can get a 24/7 occupancy of either part of or all of the first floor. This is a little bit more detailed look at how we might fit, got some enthusiasm. How we might fit the staff spaces up and how that might be accommodated by a north addition as well. And really give a presence on Osborne, not just a doorway that's carved there, but actually some presence, possibly even rethinking the cafe on that area, which you already on the south have a Caribou Coffee outside, although we've been told it's no problem supporting a cafe within the library as well. But there is a question, you know, if so much of your population and the buses primarily drop off along Osborne, would you put an amenity there? So that's looking at the physical library. Yeah.
Sorry, can I ask a quick question? Regarding the bus drop-off, have you guys examined that part of it? Because, and one reason I say this is because I used to take the commute for the bus, and so we have a drop-off over here, which is always very full, which is obviously, you know, gathered by this entrance. But did you have a chance to look and determine like how many, do they have quite a population that gets dropped off indoor, picked up, or is it just more from the proximity to the buildings? You know, like if they have a physics drop-off, it's a pretty key point.
Yeah.
So I was just curious if you looked at
I
that.
can't answer that in terms of the number of people, but I can tell you that there's about 3 times more buses that go along Osborne, and I think there's only one bus that turns down this corner.
That's true.
So based on that, I'm assuming that more people exit the bus there and walk around the building currently.
Yeah.
But I don't have strict numbers, yeah.
I can give you anecdotal.
Yeah.
We've already had, this week, twice, door alarms on that north side. People want to go out that door, and we'll have a whole bunch for the next 2 weeks.
Sure, yes,
See
they
a bus,
assume.
they can go out that way, they think they can go out.
Okay, that's what, yeah, because I mean, usually, you know, I've seen people walking, obviously, but I just didn't know volume-wise.
Anecdotally, yes.
Oh, true, true.
Anecdotally, yes, people want to go out that way.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
So door alarm statistics.
Yeah.
So simultaneous to that, we've been translating a lot of the feedback that we've been getting from you all and the departmental interviews into a program. So I'd like you to read through this quickly. So what we have determined, this is a line-by-line organization of all the spaces that we currently understand. It's a work in progress, we're refining it, that we understand will go into the library. And what we're finding is you're pretty full. You've got enough program to fill the current footprint and then some. So we're looking at ways to harvest space, be more efficient, get all those things that you want, and what are our various alternatives to getting there. But maybe more relevant than this document right now to this group is this, which is what we call a program map. So this takes all those areas and it is what we call an adjacency diagram, or it shows the relationships of spaces. It's not a plan. If you try to read this as a plan, you'll go crazy. But it does suggest that we have an entry point here that brings us into, we use the term marketplace, but it's that wow space. It's that space that just shows you all the things that are going on here. It's changeable. It has, the new collection items. It tells you about events that are going on. It's your first encounter with staff. We put what we call a blended service staff point. So you have CERC, you have reference, you have IT solutions, you have maybe people who are working with writing workshop or tutoring who can be there of assistance and help direct people, but it's at one single consolidated point there. Cafe would be very close by, would have exposure to the outside, is far larger than the one that you have now, that would accommodate seating that is cafe/study style seating, so it gives you yet another variety of seating type. We don't want to forget about the back end here where the loading dock and what needs to be close to the loading dock or close to the service elevator that serves the loading dock. And all of the orange elements are this notion of new programs, new types of programs that may or may not come into the library, but that they can be distributed around. But ultimately, this pink zone here is kind of the glue that connects all the different spaces, whether it's the green collections, whether it's quiet study, whether it's collaborative study spaces, or teaching and learning, classroom instructional environments, that this commons, which shouldn't be conceived as a singular space, but really a fluid space that is, you're not going down corridors, but you're going through active or quiet learning areas to access these different destinations that correlate to what is going on in that commons. So I know this is a lot to look at, but I think, yeah, that's I'll leave that up if it's of use. But welcome any questions that you have.
I work in one of the areas that has obnoxious pillars, which has really limited what we've been able to do with it over the years. Everything from, the classroom down room 31 to the area in the generic section that you were talking about, which really limits visibility tremendously. Is it really expensive to get rid of? At least size them down halfway or something. I know you can't get rid of them, they're support. But. So,
great question. It is a very unusual column structure that you have in the building. You can't get rid of them, or it's very costly to get rid of them. The reason they are so big, and if you notice they get small again on the lower level, but the reason they are so big is this building is designed with an air distribution system that drops ducts on the north and south side of each and every column. And so that is what is inside that big white envelope. But even if you were to get rid of those ducts, you would still have columns on roughly an 18-foot grid, I think, which makes it hard to get an unobstructed classroom out of it. One of the things we have thought about is in that, I forgot to mention in the north addition, is that addition would be sized in a column-free space to accommodate those rooms that need that extra space, like a classroom, like an event space, or a presentation space. And you could probably get anywhere from 4 to 6 classrooms in that north addition column-free. Yeah.
We have these security things. What does that mean? Does that mean that there will be people present there, or what?
Yeah, I think the idea is that they're not a security as in an armed guard, but that somebody who is present and staffed at that point, so that it's not, and this is an operational question. Some institutions have gone to the point where the threat of theft doesn't outweigh the cost of staffing that position. Or if you already have a natural staffed position like a circ desk or something in that proximity, that could serve as that, but that there's a human presence at those doors that can, if an alarm goes off or your magnetometer chimes, that somebody can react. Yeah.
So would the subject librarians be in the staff support area? Because I kind of not sure why they would, because we also do a lot of instruction, why they wouldn't be closer to some of the instruction services on this idea map or program map.
Well, first of all, this is not a...
No, I know
yeah,
it's not literal,
yeah.
because that is not what our footprint looks
Right,
like.
right. So it could be very well that an instruction room is up on the 3rd floor adjacent to where staff is, for example, or it's one flight below directly where the staff would be. And I think that's a good point. We wouldn't want to make that too distant. But I think that the efficiencies that you gain by having staff together, and that also means that when a department grows, let's say IT starts growing phenomenally, and another department has fewer needs or can move somewhere else, that it allows that growth to take place. So there's a flexibility over time. But there's also a flexibility to get you the different type of, it's not a one-size-fits-all. There's different types of work environments, and if we're talking about furniture systems, and it's pretty flexible.
I was thinking more privacy, because right now, because we teach classes, we have to meet one-on-one with students, and sometimes they just open up and tell you everything about their life. And
Yeah.
that's not they don't think about the fact that you're in an open air cubicle and there's 3 other people sharing a wall with that office.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, those needs have to come into play. One thing that we do see is that as you go to a more a furniture solution that maybe lacks the privacy of a walled office, that you have a much higher ratio of conference meeting spaces that you can use. Unlike what you have now, I'm not sure the exact count, we're projecting maybe 1 conference room for every 9 staff, I think. So you would have, if you're at, let's say you're at 90 staff, I think you're more than that, but you would have, 10 conference rooms at your disposal. Small, medium, and larger. It's a different culture of working, but I think it probably more than replaces that need that periodically occurs.
It's usually a couple times a week, so I mean, during these classes, it's fairly frequent.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned the dock. It's my impression that right now it's too small, and then with envisioning a number of activities increasing and more functions in the building, has some consideration been made to enlarging it along that surface road?
That's a little outside. We're kind of looking at the dock inward and resizing that. This is the first I've heard that the dock would need to be larger. It's busy. I think it's 1 bay and then there's a side door as well. But we are looking at making what's immediately inside the dock space a little bit more user-friendly or organized so that we can clearly separate incoming and outgoing collections from what might be special collections, and isolation and holding from what might be cafe, incoming food products and waste. And possibly a cafe located at the north end would take that out of the mix of what's going on at the dock space.
I have a second question. It's about the noise canceling system the library has. Will that be reconfigured so that it is not in places where it is now, or the other way around?
to tell me more about that. Is it a noise canceling or a sound masking system?
White noise.
Okay.
So I guess masking, so,
Yeah.
or white noise.
No, absolutely. Sound masking is pretty standard now. Are you finding there are spots that lack sound masking or that it's too loud?
Well, if you want a collaborative space, do you want people to hear each other? So I don't know if you're going to mask an area over here more intensely, and then you're better just with your pod or your
Oh, I
area.
see. So would you adjust it, sound levels in different, you certainly could, yeah.
This is just a comment. You were talking about maybe possible new staff spaces and increasing the windows. And I think you were looking at third, fourth floor and west side there. And I'm just saying, I would like to encourage that. As a person, I work up in the 204 large staff area. I'm in the middle of the room, and there's several of us here who are in the middle of that room. Cue balls around us. We can sit down, it can be sunny. Next to a tornado could be happening outside, and then it can get sunny again, and we will never know what happened. And it's a real disconnect to the outside environment, and anything that can increase that connection
Yeah.
is a good idea. So just, I appreciate that direction.
Other questions? We're almost at time. Kim?
When you mentioned the conference rooms, are those intended to be spaces we share with our users or spaces for staff?
The numbers I just gave you were just for staff.
Okay.
There are additional ones that are outside for, reference to meet with users and other types of spaces. And we are looking at greatly increasing the number of group study rooms, both ones smaller than you have and ones about the same size and even a little bit larger. So the point there is that there should be lots of rooms, and if we can get a scheduling software in place that could be set aside and used not just for group study, but also as needs arise from staff patron meetings and that type of thing.
Sorry, just one more. In regards to the staff area, I don't know if the conversation's gotten to this point, but I remember in one of the visioning sessions we were talking about staff workstations, and a lot of the suggestions or the pictures that we got to choose from were very close collaborative to me, close collaboration, which is very different than what we have now.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if, in looking at that staff space, if the idea was to kind of have that kind of furniture, if it's gotten to that point yet, because that I know would be a big culture shift with how we perform our work at this point.
The answer is no, we haven't gotten to that level yet. I mean, that's a very detailed discussion that will need to take place down the line. But I think what we do have is we have a good sense in the kind of spaces that you currently work in, and both in terms of privacy level and size. And I think that we can find eventually the right balance of accommodating either similar sizes or heights or going to something that encourages and supports the overall mission of how you all want to work as a collective. But furniture is way down the line.
We're not there yet by any stretch. It's a good question. So, and keep in mind this is a feasibility study, which means we're looking at and learning about options. So lots of the pictures we saw during those dot exercises were just pictures from other places. Perkins and Will didn't make them up just for us. They're key to them hearing what we need and want and desire, which, yes, collaboration, but hard to say. Back to Megan's question, which is kind of related to the staff space. These new proposed conference rooms will be in close proximity to where we end up with most of our staff being. So it'll be a lot easier to quickly have a conversation, perhaps of a private nature with the student, although that could also take place in the consultation spaces that we're calling them down on the more interactive first floor.
Yeah, I guess my worry is making it easy for students to get to us.
Yeah.
Because third floor is kind of removed from the rest of the service points.
about how we think about our spaces. So it's feasibility. We're getting options out there. Some of them are really exciting, and I think will really move us forward. A lot of what's on this program map, which isn't really map because it's not a proximity, you know, that whole thing is stuff. A lot of that's new stuff. That if we can find a way to position well in our current space and do some things differently, I think will be terrific for our students mostly, for us as staff, but also just for campus. So, rah-rah, right? Okay. Any more questions? All right, let's take a minute to thank our architect guests. Thanks for coming. A reminder, 9 o'clock tomorrow is canceled unless you just want to come to my office and check in. Not all at once.
Thank you for your time today,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Yeah, thank you.
Pretty exciting.
Good time.